Hello, welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve deeper into the top stories taking place not only in South Korea but across the globe. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The new year brings new changes. In 2023, people in South Korea will see a number of changes, from the scrapping of the Korean age system in official settings to an increase in the minimum wage. As such changes impact our daily lives, we are going to introduce some of the reasons behind them and the effects they will bring. Before we get to the specifics, why don't we take a look at some of the changes that are going to affect us starting 2023. South Korea has decided to end the use of its Korean age system in official settings and instead will use the international standard way of calculating age. This will go into effect this June. Expiration dates are set to be replaced with use-by dates as opposed to sell-by dates, telling buyers up to what point a product can be safely consumed. Milk and milk products will be the exception. The minimum hourly wage will rise by 460 Korean won from January 1st to 9,620 Korean won an hour. That's about $7.50. Starting January 1st, parents with infants who are younger than 12 months will receive a monthly subsidy of 700,000 Korean won, and with infants younger than 24 months, 350,000 Korean won. From January 1st, the tax on gasoline has been raised to 615 Korean won per liter, up by 99 Korean won, as the government has reduced its tax cuts from 37% to 25%. The government has jacked up the electricity rates for consumer and industrial use by 13.1 Korean won per kilowatt hour, the largest margin in about 4 decades. Seoul City is considering increasing subway and bus fares from April. If realized, it will be Seoul's first price hike in public transport fares since 2016. Corporate tax rate cut by 1 percentage point in each of the 4 tax brackets, bringing the highest tax rate down from 25% to 24%. Uneased tax burden for homeowners. For people who own multiple homes, property holding taxes will be only levied on apartments that exceed 900 million Korean won, rather than from 600 million won. For single homeowners, the base will be raised to 1.2 billion won from 1.1 billion. Last but not least, the government is to add Christmas and Buddha's birthday to the list of holidays that can have an alternative holiday when they fall on the weekend from this year. Now, for in-depth analysis of those changes, we have invited Professor An Jun-sung from Yonsei University Graduate School of International Studies in the studio. Hello, Professor An. Welcome to the show. And we also have Choi Yeon-sun, professor at Myeongji University, in the studio as well. It is a pleasure to see you, Professor.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Well, starting with the age system, Professor An. Now, South Korea is to scrap its own system and start using the international age counting system in all judicial and administrative areas. Now, what are Korea's own system and why sudden change?
Well, I have to make a correction here, because it's not like we have not used the international standard, right? We've been using the international standard. Problem was that we used to use 3 different standards at the same time. That's why there's a public confusion, right? So I should say now we try to standardize the Korean age system by using the international age. So let's go back to the first question, right? What is the differences, right? But there's a Korean age, right? That means that you become 1 when you're born, right? And you add 1 year and on New Year's Day, right? So you have a rice cake soup, right? Every time you have a soup, like 1 year old, right? That kind of joke in Korea. And the second one is international age, means that when you're born, you're 0, and you add 1 year on each anniversary, which is your birthday. So basically, international age is based on your birthday. And the last one, calendar year, means that when someone was born is 0 and add 1 year on each New Year's Day. It just basically means that year differences. Why we have 3 different systems? Because there's some special law in Korea, like a Juvenile Protection Act, something like that, have to protect some type of people. Like, for example, if you go to high school, sometimes it used to be like sometimes there's 1 year as much as 1 year difference. So if you apply like only 17 years as the birthday, like international age, in the same class, right? Some class may become juvenile, and the other may be not juvenile. Right? That's some policy issue. That's why as a government, Korean government have to use the 3 different systems on different situations, right? So that's the issue, right? So why you want using? One of the things is it's a social cultural issue, right? And I've been like debating on this issue for like decade with my family members and especially my wife, and they're talking about but people like saying, why we want to say international age or use Korean age? So I think that it's time to standardize and leave behind all the confusion, public confusion, just move on to new topics, in progress, I guess.
Right, then is there going to be any benefits by using the international age counting system?
Well, first one, you can basically minimize the public confusion, right? And it's very often, I remember when I grew up and talking about when I made a cousin to, New Year's Day, how old are you? Basically some people using the lunar calendar, sometimes getting confusing, right? It's kind of a joke, right, at that time. But I think the one is to minimize the socioeconomic cost incurred by is public confusion. Also, I think the most important things, you get younger, right? Up to 2 years, right? That's good news, right?
All right. Well, Professor Chen, moving on to the matters that heavily impact people's livelihoods, gasoline prices rose across the nation as the government rolled back the tax cuts from 37% to 25%, but 37% stays for diesel. Now, why is that? And isn't this going to be a burden for people who are already suffering from the, inflation?
Right. Gas prices hike is a negative impact on the many people, and the government tried to reduce that hardship through this reduction. But originally it is announced like limited time. Gasoline tax is reduced, but the government cannot hold anymore because there are many public sectors debt, and the fiscal deficit is getting higher and higher. So the government decide to maybe just reset about the 37% for the gasoline price. But diesel has some different politics because many diesel cars in the South Korea, maybe many another world at the same time, but maybe the commercial vehicle and truckers, which is driven by the working class. They are very vulnerable in this economic crisis and then this pandemic the period time. So the government decide maybe we can have a more reduction, more longer time about diesel for some political reason, but government cannot hold anymore about the gasoline price tax cut.
Right, but not just gasoline prices. Unfortunately, electricity rates start going up this first quarter this year, costing a 4-member family to pay 4,000 Korean won more per month. And not only that, Seoul City is considering to raise the transportation fees, for example, for subways and buses, right? Now, could you explain the background of such rises?
Right. Everything's getting higher and higher.
Yes.
That is a big problem. But it is inevitable to maybe the government to raise the electricity price and the transportation fees because if we keep this load rate more, maybe the public government-owned institution, so-called public enterprise, such as maybe the Korea Electricity Power Corporation and the gas company and the Seoul Metro, those maybe public enterprise will be in the big trouble. Maybe they should maybe suffer more and more the deficit, fiscal deficit, that result may be very bad shape in the future. So maybe government decide, maybe people can suffer from this some rise of the electricity fees and then maybe transportation fees, but it is time, some turning point. We must find another way, but we must also save our public institutions.
So it was an inevitable choice by the government because of the deficit.
Right.
Now, moving on to the minimum wage, Professor Ahn, it is going to rise by 460 Korean won, which is a 5% increase on year. Now, do you believe this is the right amount of increase?
Yes, well, I mean, as it says, that this year's minimum hourly wage now is 9,621, which is 5% increase from the last year. And you hear that, well, actually, if you add up, right, you can use 40 hours per week. That's about 2 million won per month. That's quite a number. But if you look at the international perspective, let's compare with the Japan case. It's very surprising that, and this year, actually, it's the first time in the history, minimum hourly wage of Korea actually exceeded the Tokyo that of Tokyo, which is the highest in Japan. So basically, the average minimum age in Korea is exceeding that highest Japan and Tokyo areas, the minimum wage. So that's really high. So if you look at that perspective, right, and we look at the people that's growing concern about the relative productivity of the Korean workforce in the global market, because that there's the work well, look at both sides, right? If it's the minimum wage increase is good news for the working class. However, if you look at the company perspective, that's bad news and increased cost for the company as well. So I guess we have to look at both sides and how it balance it. Also the productivity, how we look at productivity, the increasing the increase the minimum wage. Also we have to find out how to increase the productivity of the Korean workforce as well.
Right, so it will be important to balance the effects for both sides. Now, Professor An, we need to also tap on the food expiration date system, which is going to show use by dates instead of sell by dates. Now, what are the differences between those two, and how much food waste can we reduce?
Yeah, it's very interesting, right? It's a question because I was like, actually I didn't know it until I got the news, right? It's very interesting because I got used to it, like sell by day. So I remember that I have a friend, friends who used to work in, grocery store, and then he told me that he threw away all the product, right?
Wow.
After expiration, you have a, scanning, and you see that beep, the sound, and means that it's expired, and they throw away, or he eat it by himself, something like that, right? But now they change it to like a sell by day. So how different? I don't think there's a big difference from the consumer perspective, because the people just looking at the expiration date, expiration date of the product, right? Doesn't really clearly showing that it's the sell by day or like the use by day. However, let's go back to the question. What is it? Sell by day means that it's the period like determined to be safe for the human consumption, right? And if the consumer comply with the storage instruction provided under food label. So there's a big condition if, right? If they comply with all the storage instructions, right? Right, so that's however, the sell by day means that basically the time period between the manufacturing day and then the actual sale day to the consumer. So what's the difference? It's different perspectives, right? The sell by day basically focus on the consumer when they buy it, right? And then use by day is by the consumer perspective, right. And sell by day is more like manufacturer perspective, how we do it. It's more like if you're a legal perspective, there's liability. Who's going to be liability? Because if, there's a legal hassle about how you interpret it. However, there's a difference. But from the consumer perspective, if you're looking at it, you go to the grocery store. Oh, there's date here. Oh, is it expired date? Is it sell by day or the use by day? It's not really still confusing because most consumer look at the number, right? They disregard the product if the expiration is over, right? Boom, right? That's why the idea about adapting, the use by day is to try to minimize the waste, right? So I hope there's a work, but still there's a grace period for 1 year, right. So the manufacturer can post it either side or have to repeat both sides. But it's a little bit confusing, but still we got 1 year to see how you developed it, right?
Right, so during the grace period for 1 year,
right.
The government should, manage the risks or, confusion that people might face, right?
Public awareness and then more campaign, perhaps, tell them what to do, right?
Right.
Don't throw away, right?
Right. Now, moving on to the policies that were made to boost the fertility rate, Professor Che. Under the new plan, the government is going to give more subsidies for parents with newborn children, but is this measure going to encourage parents to have more babies?
Unfortunately, it might not work effectively. Recently we hear maybe being used about our infertility rate, such as in the November 2022, it broke 0.8, which is 0.79. So this is maybe world class, maybe the record, but it is very interesting, some of the phenomenon in the East Asian, like Taiwan, getting less than us in the future. And then China has a very low, like 1.12, and then Japan has 1.3. But we are the best, 0.79 or 0.80. But why young couple hesitate to have babies and children? There are many other reasons, but financial aid is just one little piece of the big puzzle, but only this way it cannot solve anything.
Then in what ways can we encourage them to have more babies?
Recently, there are very interesting empirical study. Korea Research Institute of the Settlement issue, Korea Institute of the Human Settlement, they announced about their relationship between the medium housing price and infertility rate, which is if medium housing rate is increase, then our baby is getting down, which is a 1% increase is a 0.002% down of the baby's numbers. So which is we must think about for the young generation, young couples, about some housing issue and education issue. And we are too competitive to each other. So they experience that kind of difficulties in the experience of their growing up. So we must change our society. Government invests a lot of money the last 20 years, but nothing changed as the infertility is going down.
Right, so we need to look at various aspects to boost up the fertility rate. Right. Professor An, there were also several tax reforms, right, that will come in 2023, and one of them was corporate tax rate, which has been lowered by 1 percentage point by the National Assembly passing the bill. Though the cut is smaller than the ruling party's original proposal, is this change going to boost up the company's investment?
A tough question, right? Well, yeah, but it's good news, right, for the companies, right? So I think initially, right, the ruling party, the People's Power Party, they tried to get 3% cut only for the highest tax bracket. So it's about a top 100 company. And however, the opposition party were opposed to it, right? And then they come up with some kind of compromise. Well, they didn't really. They were compromised on the 1% cut for the all tax brackets. So it means that 1% tax cut for the old company, Korean companies. So now we're asking you, which one is better, 3% for the all highest top 100 company, or they say 1% cut for old company? Well, it really depends on your perspective, I guess, right? If you're a big company, maybe you prefer 3%, but if you're a small company, maybe you're happy with what happened right now, right? So I guess, and is it going to boost the economy? Well, boosting the economy is really big, very comprehensive issues, right? It's not only just the tax cut. Also, 1% cut, I don't think really there's significant effect, but at least it's good news, right? And if you're a really big company, I think still 1% cut is really high number if you compare to small company as well. And my concern is that, and I guess that the Korean government was looking at about the international competitiveness because they tried to invite more global company invest money in Korea. So tax cut is one of the issue, I guess, because then you put the U.S. and many European companies, government try to get kind of tax cut, right? So issue is about where are we really internationally competitive to invite a global company invest money into Korea? I think that's the big issue. I think the ruling party looking at, and the opposition party were looking at more like even distribution of the wealth. Basically, is social equity. Let's give all companies the same equal footing. I guess that's the different perspective. And then, well, the answer was more like a tough question to answer. We'll see what happens. But I think it's still good news to everybody. To save some money, I guess.
Right. Now, aside from the tax reform for corporates, there was another tax reform which was to ease the tax burden for homeowners, right? How has it been eased, and what effect do you think it would bring to housing sales or housing market?
Housing price and housing market maybe more depend on interest rate, not deregulation and government policy. But if we remember, just 1 year ago, government tried to how making this hot market cool down. But now we are talking about how this cold market making hot. So this is a very interesting situation, but it is a very hard time for everybody. So we must remember in the worldwide, from the United States, they just keep getting higher and higher interest rate. In 2023, United States will keep their high interest or higher interest. So we must remember the housing market is in the recession now. and then it is maybe we cannot help. So we should maybe rather than just focus on reduce about some tax or the reduce about the more deregulation, maybe we must think about how we will go through this hard time. There are many vulnerable population who will have a big maybe a lot of the difficulty and suffering through this hard time. So government need to prepare about, we want a soft landing, but it is not sure. So we must prepare. There are some people will suffer a lot. So how we prepare? Yeah.
Right. Now, the last question, Professor An, the government is to add the 2 holidays, Christmas and Buddha's birthday, to the list of the holidays they are going to have alternative ones when they fall on the weekend. Now, what is your takeaway for this? Could we briefly talk about it?
Well, I guess, I understand why the government tried to work on it, try to increase the holidays so they more boost the economy,
right.
in a way, leisure market. But I personally kind of disagree with the introduction of the Christmas and Buddha's Day, because Korea is they have we have a freedom of religion, right? So I guess if you select only top 2 religion for the holidays and what about the others, right? I think that there's a minority religion as well in Korea, right? So in terms of fairness, I guess that you would be more careful that if we want to get a specific religion day as the holiday, national holiday, I think there's a more general consensus on what to do and what to not do. And I think still looking at the small minority group as well. I think that's my take on it.
All right. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Professor An, for your insights.
My pleasure.
And Professor Che, thank you.
Thank you.
Now that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Have a great rest of the evening, and we will be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories on the issues happening in South Korea and, of course, around the globe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.